Good to see you back on the Gabster channel. My name is Gabby. I'm gonna talk today about 5 tips to improve the power to your system. It's not just about power cables, but the whole line and the whole chain to get that power as clean as possible to your system. Tip number 1, and it's probably the most important one, is dimmer switches. They are the worst thing for your power line that you could ever imagine, and I'm just going to quickly show you why. Okay, so here's a dimmer switch, and I'm using my little probe here that sniffs quite a bit of noise, if there is any. So this is normal, just a low amount of noise. And look what happened when I turn the dimmer switch on. That's a huge amount of distortion, and it travels throughout the entire wall, basically. And yeah, and as soon as I turn it off, it goes back to normal. So this is what dimmer switches do for your line, not just the area, the entire line, the entire house actually. Now don't be alarmed, this is amplifying the noise probably like hundreds of times, and the noise, although may go into your, let's say, your amplifier, the amplifier still have some good filtering that could reject that noise, but nevertheless you kind of don't want that kind of stuff in your line. So here it is again, it's off now. I'm going to turn it on, and it's pretty loud. Now, if you can't get rid of your dimmer switch, and most of us can't really, the best way to do is to actually put it on max. So as soon as I put it on maximum power, it's not a huge problem anymore. It's just okay. Either put it on maximum power or turn it on. Now it made noise I was dimming to turn off, but that's, once it's off, it's off. So on, once it's on, completely gone. And as it was dimming, made some noise and then turned off. So if you have dimmer switches in your house and you're trying to do any critical listening, either have the dimmer switch on max or on off. Do not put them somewhere in between. The lower dimming you get, the more noise you will see. So the technical reason why dimmer switches are bad is because they send pulses of electricity. So they go on, off, on, off, on, off. And how fast or slow that on, off is makes your light dim or not. And so, but those pulses are so bad because now you got spikes and lows on your line, and that's going to be really bad for your system. And especially the more lights are on that dimmer switch, the more jitter is going to be in the line. And so you want to keep those pulses not happening. So either turn your dimmer switch completely on, which is good, at least you have light in your room, or simply turn them off. One or the other, but not dimming. Just imagine, for example, your air conditioning going on and off, on and off, on and off. That's not going to be good for your line. Now, what if the dimmer switch is not on your hi-fi gear line? It's on a different line in your house. Does it affect your line? Or even better, what if you have a dedicated line? Does that dimmer switch that's on some other line affect your dedicated line? We are also going to find out, and let's find those answers. So to do this, I'm putting a power cable wrapped around the little probe sniffer. There we go. So we're just going to leave this guy alone here and go back to where the dimmer switch is. It's right here. And again, let's try if it gets worse or not. So as soon as I turn it on, this is full, not so bad. Let's start dimming. So you could see it got worse. That's off. And that's on. So it affects it not as bad but that's still affected, yet it's on a different line. So here I've got a dedicated line this time, and we're going to plug our power here into it. And so I've got it, I have it here on this side here, so trying to monitor, and we're going to try if the dimmer switch affects the dedicated line or not. I'm not using a shielded cable because I actually want to see what kind of noise is going, and that's why I'm not using the best cable here. And let's see if the dimmer switch affects the dedicated line or not. So as you can see, even on a dedicated line, there was still a little bit of noise. So having a dedicated line is great, but it's not a fortress like you can isolate it yourself from the whole neighborhood or your rest of your house. Which brings us to tip number 2, and that is a dedicated line. Before I do that, I'm just gonna, for people wondering what this probe is about, I did a video specifically on this probe. It is a cheap probe. It's not like, this is not a state-of-the-art equipment, but it's a crude way to test things and see what's going on in your house, your equipment, and your gear. So let's go back. So dedicated line is a very important thing. It's not all about noise. There's also, say your fridge kicks in, your air conditioner kicks in, you're gonna have a drop in the power. You have a sag, what we call. So a dedicated line will help a little bit in that. So what you wanna do is run a dedicated line from your power panel to your equipment. If you are renting a place, or let's say it's too complicated, the very least you want to do is, like I said, eliminate all, make your line that your hi-fi equipment is hooked up to, make it a dedicated line by eliminating other things that's on that same line. So let's say you turn the breaker off on your hi-fi gear system, a little outlet, and then you see what else in the house turned off. And then you check, oh, okay, do I have a light switch here? Do I have a microwave there? Whatever it is. So make sure there is no major, dimmer switches on it or things that could pollute the lines. The least you can take off that line, the better, because that would make it, in a sense, a dedicated line. So that was tip number 2. If you are running a dedicated line, make sure you run at least a 12 gauge wire. 10 is better if you can, 12 is okay. And you most likely need to hire an electrician to keep it up to code. And it's something that's going to set you back somewhere between $300 to $1,000. Depends on how far you're going and how technical or how difficult the hookup is going to be. But some of the other things don't cost you anything. Turning your dimmer switch on full maximum power costs you nothing and makes things a lot better. And number 3 is going to be the power cables. Power cables are very important. Because it's all about the chain, remember, from the panel to your system. And that's part of the chain. It's not a very long one, it's a short one, but it's still, nevertheless, it's important. This, where you plug this thing in, and like how 6 wires are, and the connections are very important. So make sure you have very good quality connection. You do not have to spend a fortune on a power cable. Really, there's no rocket science in a power cable. All it is some cable that have good connectors, some good OFC copper in there that is shielded. I cannot stress the importance of being shielded. I'll put a clip from my other video about the importance of shielding. So we're going to compare 2 cables. Your regular cables that sometimes come with your DAC or CD player, whatever it is. So this one is a regular cable, but we're going to plug it into something at least is doing something. And in this case, we're just looking at the cable, not the actual power supply. So you could see, because this is not shielded, you can actually, if you have other sensitive line inputs, let's say coming from your phono stage really close to a power cable like this, you're gonna probably get some noise coming from it. So it's always good to keep your power cords away from interconnects. Make sure you have a little bit of distance. Even better if you could get shielded cables, that would be even better. In this case, we're using a shielded cable. We're going to plug it to exact same power supply that we had the other cable plugged into, and you could see the noise is much less. Why? Because this is shielded, and that's why you should always use shielded power cables. I'm not saying go and spend, you know, $500 and a couple of grand for a cable. It's just a regular, this is from Amazon. I think they're about 50 bucks, something like that. It's a very good cables inside. They're really they're like thick OFC copper and shielded. Shielded is the key, and that's gonna make a huge difference. Now, whether you want to spend a fortune on a power cable, that's a different story for another video, but at the very least, keep your interconnect away from your power cables. That's step one. And step two, use as much as possible shielded cables, because as much as you try to keep them away from each other, before you know it, you have a big spaghetti of wires behind all your components, and they're all connected and so close together, and they're going to be radiating onto each other. Also, you want to make sure, so like I said, the connectors are good. Like this one has copper connectors at the ends on both sides. So that's important. You're going to have a very good connectivity. And they're very solid and sturdy sockets and connectors. And it's, like I said, nice, thick OFC copper in there and shielded, as we said. So that was tip number 3. Tip number 4 is your socket. So your power socket, you want to make sure that this thing grips in like really tight, not just being loose. So you need some good quality power socket. Again, you don't need to spend a fortune on them. You can get one off Amazon. There's so many really good ones. I'll show you the one I bought for my system, and I'll put a link for it in the description below. So like I said, so a good 12 or 10 gauge power cable, a good power cable. This is also from Amazon, about $50. You really do not want to spend more than that on a power cable. You can if you like to, but the law of diminishing recurrence kicks in like huge. Like you're not going to see much more of a big difference. The difference between this and a cheap power cable is huge, but from this to, you know, your $5,000 power cable is like, I doubt anybody could tell the difference. Some people claim that they can, and I would like to see that in A/B testing and blinded. But this is a story and a debate we can fight over on the next video, but let's at least keep things at least shielded with a good decent power cable. At least let's cross the first mile, and then we can talk about the last few meters after. So that was tip number 4. And the last thing is tip number 5. For tip number 5, I'm going to talk about switching power supplies. Not a huge fan of switching power supplies. The technology is improving. There are some good switching power supplies out there, some excellent switching power supplies out there, but unfortunately 99% of them are extremely noisy. And some of them are not just noisy, they're like bad, like they'll really ruin your line. I'll put a small clip from a couple of videos I've done in the past about that as well. This is a switching power supply, and you could hear the noise on it. And if we plug in a different one, it's another similar power supply. much quieter. So they are not all the same. It's another switching power supply. It doesn't ripple like the other guy. You can see it's very, very low. It's nothing. Even when you get super close to the transformer, look at that. Nothing's happening. It's very low. Those transformers are medical grade transformers. They have a built-in shield around them, and they're not noisy at all, and it makes a big difference. So you're talking about 3 of them here. I'm just gonna. This is the noise without by them having them off and turning them on. Not a huge difference. Just a little bit more, but not much more. And once you put that cover on, it's pretty quiet. And so in comparison, I'm just going to show you what a switching mode transformer sounds like. And this is a switching mode transformer. And look at that. And that goes right through the line and everything. So as you can see, it's, yeah, if you can avoid them, please do. The more you keep them away from your house, from your line, the better. Use linear power supplies whenever possible, if you can. It's gonna really, it's a night and day change to your system, especially if they are the cheap kind. There's few companies that make some really good switching power supplies. There's Hifi, there's a few other ones as well, but you know, they're good, but not as good as linear. Linear is always going to be your best power supply. Also, if you are using a power supply, always check what's the ripple current on it. So a good power supply will have specifications on it. And the big one is the ripple. The ripple is how much, so you have DC, right? So there's always some residual AC still on that line. And you want to know how much left of that AC still on that line. We call that the ripple current. And in the specs, it will tell you what's ripple is. Some of these, they're like 50 millivolts, 100 millivolts, 200. The good power supplies are microvolts, like 20 microvolts and so forth. So there is a big difference. So check the ripple on your power supply. Having checked the ripple doesn't necessarily mean you can believe it. Often they're just numbers they throw in on their best, maybe power supply they've ever made in a specific tin can or whatever. But if you can test it yourself, it's even better. I will put a link below about the power cable that I use, the probe that I'm using, the socket that I'm using, if anybody's interested in, and save you guys from searching forever, because these are, sometimes you spend a lot of time just to find something and then you don't know. At least you know it's been tested and it seems to work okay. Please subscribe. It will really help my channel to keep it going, and so I can make some more videos and share with you guys. If you haven't not seen any of my other videos, I'll put a link on the side about my speakers here, the GS11, they're DIY speakers. On this side, I'll put a link to my DAC, also a DIY DAC that's behind me here as well, if you want to explore some other things that I've built. Take care and hope to see you again.